I have put on the table a schedule of activities for this academic year for the Emeritus Academy, and of course you can see the progression with the check marks on it, and so you can also see what will be happening the remainder of this semester. I have the great pleasure of introducing, this is, I think, a fun topic, introducing Dave Elliot, who is a professor emeritus in the School of Earth Sciences and a member of the Emeritus Academy. He has served as the director of the Bird Polar Research Center and presently serves as a research associate for the Bird Polar Research Center. Professor Elliot has secured over 20 grants from the National Science Foundation on, let's say, a variety of topics related to geology and in particular Antarctica. And the title of his presentation, and he will pronounce it correctly with the likelihood I will not, which is Arloposaurus and Other Adventures During a Misspent Career as an Antarctic Geologist. Please.
Thank you. How many of you have been to Antarctica? I know there are two. Oh, I better watch what I say in that case. Okay. A little bit of geography just for clarification. 1.5 times the size of the United States, lower 48 states. I'm going to talk about South Shetland Islands and Deception up here, go to Hope Bay, and then across to McMurdo Station, which is the principal US station, and talk about geology in the Transantarctic Mountains. And then I'm going to pop back up here to Seymour Island, and South Orkneys and back in Hope Bay, and return to McMurdo. I prepared a talk that I had to cut by about half, so I'm going to be racing along. But first, the reason that Antarctica was discovered was not just that people were trying to find the mysterious southern continent, but the sealers who were going after fur seals on South Georgia, Falkland Islands, the populations were exterminated. So they were obviously looking for additional places to go and hunt seals. 201 years ago today, the land was first sighted in the South Shetland Islands, and they recognized the presence of large colonies of seals there, so that in the next 3 years there was a massive migration of sealers to South Shetland Islands. And if you can read this, it says R.R. Macy, 1820, 1821, 1822, and no more. No more might be due to the rotten weather in South Shetland Islands. It can be miserable there. But I think much more likely is that in those 3 years, they effectively eliminated the fur seal population. It actually came back in the 1870s, and it was wiped out again. And then they started reappearing in the late 1940s. And of course, they've been building ever since. But anyway, this is just a little introduction, because I arrived at Deception Island in December 1961. Deception Island is an important place simply because it is the only natural harbor in Antarctica. And I'll come back to that later. It is, in fact, a volcano, about 10 miles in diameter, and it's breached in one place, which allows the vessels then to get into this safe harbor. It's volcanic and exploded last in 67, 68, and 70. At that time, it destroyed the Chilean base. It made the Argentinian base uninhabitable. It destroyed the British base, which is back there, and it also did great damage to the old whaling station that had been occupied and used in the 1920s and 30s. But my destination was Hope Bay at the northern end of the Antarctic Peninsula. And at Hope Bay, I was one of a party of 9, a surveyor, 2 general assistants, a geophysicist, radio man, diesel mechanic, geologist, and the base leader, who is a meteorologist. Now, flag flying, as we'll find out, is an important occupation, or used to be an important occupation in Antarctica. But I'll again come back to that. This is the Trinity House, the British base there when I was on the ice with them. And it had accommodation for maybe 22 people at the most, so when there were only 9, we had plenty of space. We all lived around one room, bunkhouse, dining room, living room, you name it. And then at one end was a kitchen, and beyond that, a place where the dogs were kept, and the bitches who are pupping would go in there as well and have pups, and of course, we see some of them there. Other end of the building had a couple of offices for geologists and surveyors, but more importantly, a big workshop for the sledgers, because at that time, all the activity by the British program was with dog sleds. And here is what it looks like, facing the dog team, 1 in front, 8 behind, pulling a sledge, and it just depends on the surface how much they can actually transport. Under hard snow and ice, they could easily pull 2,000 pounds, no problem at all. But of course, if the surface gets soft, it's heavy, then things can be a real struggle. My job there was, as a geologist, was to examine rocks which had been seen from afar by a party that had traveled out on the Larsen ice shelf on their way from Hope Bay to Marguerite Bay, about 600 miles away. 600 kilometers, got it wrong. That point, this is the Drygalski Glacier. That point is that one. And I was there to examine these rocks, which in fact are granites and other sedimentary rocks, which have analogues in South America. And the geology, in fact, is very similar. The older geology is very similar to that in Patagonia. And again, I'll come back to that on another tack. Here, the peninsula is actually a long, narrow, sinuous plateau. It's about 6,000 feet above sea level, as we see here, and the width of the plateau ranges down to maybe 200 or 300 yards at most. It really is a long, narrow plateau, but it's extremely important from the point of view of the weather. On the Pacific side, it is a maritime climate. Lots of snow, wind, nasty weather. Shetlands lie on the maritime side of the peninsula. Come over on the eastern side, on the Weddell side, and it's a polar climate. And so it is much colder, maybe more windy, but at least the sun shines, unlike it does on the maritime climate side. This is in August, long shadows, and the pardon me, in the middle of the day. But from Hope Bay, one could work all year round because it is north of the Antarctic Circle. So we worked all year round, including the summer, and in the summer it gets quite warm, particularly if there's no wind. And there are no prizes for guessing which one I am. I'm not talking about those two either. 3 of us with a peninsula in the background, and we've been out for about a month and we were heading home. This was actually taken on Christmas Day 1962. We were going back to Hope Bay. And this is a view of Hope Bay from a different perspective. The British hut, Trinity House, is right there adjacent to the snow slope. You need to be close in order to have the dogs who just run the sledges up there. It's very nice and easy. This is the Argentine base, which is a long way, and clearly you would have big trouble getting dogs and sledges from there up onto the ice. In 1961, they had maybe two or three huts down there. But by 78, when this was taken, it was quite an encampment. Now, another little bit of history here. At the end of the Second World War, Britain was getting concerned about German raiders in the South Atlantic. What they wanted to do was deny Deception Island as a harbor and safe haven for the German raiders. And so they launched an expedition to occupy part of the peninsula, in particular Deception Island, Port Lockroy, which is another place visitors often go to. And in 1944, they established those two bases. It wasn't until 1945 that Hope Bay was established down here, and that was because of a bad ice year. The base, built in 1945, was burned down in 1948 with the loss of 2 lives, unfortunately. And when the British Antarctic Survey came back in 1952, they found the Argentine base down the hill here, which is all very well, and they started unloading the stores from the ship to go and build the base up here. What happened was that when they landed and started getting the stores on shore, they were greeted by rifle shots and bullets whizzing over their heads. And these were the only shots that in fact ever been fired in Antarctica. There's never been any other. And at that, pardon me, at that time, Britain maintained a South Atlantic fleet, so that when they retreated from the rifle fire, got back on the boat and disappeared, they summoned the governor of the Falkland Islands and the frigate, the Burghead Bay, to come down and take care of matters. Urban legend has it that they came round Contact Point, guns pointing, which they always do on a ship, and shortly thereafter, occupants of the base down on the shore here were seen to be fleeing across the rocks towards the penguin rookery. I point out that that is an urban legend, and I'm not quite sure that it's true. But it is, in fact, a reflection of what was going on at that time in Antarctica. Because at that time, there were territorial claims being pursued. And the territorial claims overlapped on the peninsula. Chile, Argentina, and Britain. Forget Brazil, that's a later thing altogether. Forget that one. And so during the late 40s and early 50s, one party would hand a note of protest to the base commander of another party, and it would be rejected, and they would go back. They would land somewhere else, put a claims notice in a tin can, build a cairn on top, plant a flag, and go away. The other party would come back, push the cairn down, throw the claim away, and destroy the flag. And in fact, for about 10 years, it had a sort of Gilbert and Sullivan opera air to it all. People going around destroying cairns and planting flags and so on. Well, in 1948, the US had in fact proposed a UN trusteeship for Antarctica, but that never actually got anywhere. However, in the early 50s, the international scientific community was thinking about the next International Geophysical Year, which was due to run from July 57 to December 58. And the scientific community, international scientific communities, got together and bases were established by the seven claimant nations, Chile, UK, Argentina, Norway, Australia, France, New Zealand, and 5 others, the first 3 of which maintained that they could make a claim but have never done so. The US program sat at the South Pole, McMurdo Station. This base was handed over to the Australians, another one to the Kiwis, had a base up on the Antarctic Peninsula. The Russians, in contrast, ringed the continent. See, we sat at the South Pole on all the claims where they came to the South Pole. They established bases all the way around the continent. Well, everyone was fine and happy at that time, and in fact, no, I'll come to that in a moment. Pardon me. I'm losing my train of thought. This is awful. Okay. In the middle of the IGY, I come back to it, middle of IGY, the Russians said that they were going to continue operations in Antarctica after the end of the December 1958. In other words, they were not going to withdraw. And this prompted the United States to start a diplomatic initiative to prevent conflict, because clearly, if you have 3 overlapping territorial claims, there's always the potential for some sort of conflict. And in 1961, the Antarctic Treaty was signed by the 7 claimant nations and those 5 non-claimants. What it has is its, I say, potted provisions, because there are many others beyond that. Peaceful purposes only, demilitarized. The military are allowed to support scientific activities, but they are not to be military stations per se as part of the regular military. Freedom of scientific investigations, exchange of plans, and so on. Most importantly, all the territorial claims were put into abeyance. What that meant was that nothing that was done during the time of the treaty would either diminish or enhance any territorial claim. So that, for instance, when the Argentines decided that they would do a little claim boosting, they flew down to Hope Bay, the wife of base commander, and she gave birth to one Pablo at Hope Bay. 7 other Argentinian children have been born in Antarctica, and 3 Chilean as well in another part of Antarctica. But discovery, if you're going to make a claim after discovery, you actually have to have a settlement that is self-sufficient. Well, clearly you can't have a self-sufficient community in Antarctica. You've got to import, well, maybe if you're Inuit, you would be able to survive, but we couldn't. And so that was no claim at all, and the claims, in fact, were exercised by, in the British case, by the base commanders, who were sworn in as magistrates and appointed postmasters. And that was the second best way of establishing your claim. And I notice as well here, no nuclear explosion, so on, observers, and the US in particular was very prominent in visiting other bases to ensure that the terms of the treaty were being kept. Geographic area south of 60, in fact, raises another interesting issue for anyone who is a lawyer, because how does the treaty fit in with the United Nations Law of the Sea, which deals with the deep oceans and the continental shelves, and that is an unresolved question. Another interesting aspect of this was that in 1967, the Treaty on Outer Space was signed. The terms of the Treaty on Outer Space almost mirror the Antarctic Treaty, and it must in fact have been a large part of the thinking that went into the Outer Space Treaty. However, demilitarized and so on, one wonders how long it is going to last given the recent advent of Space Force. Okay, I have to move over now to McMurdo, which in the early days, the logistics was provided by the US Navy, obviously stemming from Admiral Byrd's involvement in Antarctica. It was a pretty grungy place in the 1960s. It looked like a sort of mining town in northern Canada, something like that. However, if you turned your back on it and looked out across McMurdo Sound, you could see the Transantarctic Mountains rising there to about 12,000 feet and 60 miles away. If you climb the top of Observation Hill and look northeast, you could see Mount Erebus, 12,500 feet high. This is sea level. Mount Erebus is active now, and when James Clark Ross first saw it in January 1842, there was a red glow in the steam coming out of the summit of Erebus, and it has probably had an active lava lake in the summit ever since James Ross Clark first saw it some 150 years ago, 70 years ago. But my objective in going there was not to go to McMurdo, but to go through McMurdo and on to the central Transantarctic Mountains. This is about 400 miles from the South Pole. It was a geology expedition from Ohio State, and our field objective were the sedimentary rocks which form this cliff here up Mount Fowler, and a whole sequence more which is not visible at Mount Fowler, and these are lavas on the top. This is a sequence of great interest at that time because in the mid to late 60s, the ideas about continental drift, seafloor spreading, and Gondwana land were still matters of much scientific debate and discussion. And for those who believed in Gondwana land, that is all the southern continents, that they had once been joined together, there appeared to be strong evidence in the flora and faunas from South America, South Africa, Peninsular India, Australia, but nothing known about Antarctica. You could argue that animals could walk, if sea level was a little bit lower, could walk from South America to South Africa via the Bering Strait. Well, I know that's a little far-fetched, but for the purist, you really need tangible evidence that they were connected. And this is where Peter Barrett, who was a graduate student here at that time, and Graphite Peak come in, because in January 1968, 67, I mean, Peter found a bone fragment in the rocks which turned out to be part of an amphibian. And so clearly there was a possibility of vertebrate fossils being found. I mean, lots of people had looked beforehand and nobody had found anything, and the thinking was, well, maybe there is nothing in Antarctica after all. However, the discovery of that fragment persuaded the National Science Foundation and Office of Polar Programs, persuaded them very easily that they should support another project to go looking for bones. Well, this is an OSU-led project at Colsack Bluff. It was a small operation. There were maybe 15 Navy people, a couple of helicopters. There were 10 or 12 scientists. 4 of them were vertebrate paleontologists, led by Ned Colbert from the Museum of Natural History in New York. On the first day in the field, little bone fragments were found in these rocks but further to the right beyond where they're exposed on the photo. About 10 days later, right in this outcrop, the vertebrate guys found this. It looks pretty insignificant, but Ned Colbert was able to identify it as a tusk belonging to the genus Lystrosaurus. And it turned out to be a small Lystrosaurus, about 16 inches long, and it must have lived in swampy land. That's the interpretation of the skull and the teeth and so on. Lived in swampy terrain. This is well known from South Africa, very well known from South Africa. When you think of an animal of that size, 16 inches long, looking like that, it's difficult to imagine how it could have got from Africa to Antarctica swimming. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So this became the crucial evidence that those southern continents had been joined together, that Gondwana land was in fact not a figment of the imagination of southern hemisphere geologists who had spent too long in the sun, and that continental drift was a reality. And seafloor spreading became the explanation for continental drift. Well, my job was to work on the basalt lavas there. They're about 1,500 feet thick. This second lava here is 450 feet. That's about the size, height of the Levesque Tower. You see a little white band running along here? You see it better there. It is a lake bed, and out of that lake bed came little fish, just like the things that you buy in the rock shops and come from Wyoming. Different genus, different species, but it's the same size and looks just the same to me. Well, I actually have to leap back to Seymour Island and the northern Antarctic Peninsula because as a result of circumstances that would never be repeated today, I was able to visit Seymour Island with a group of geologists and follow in the footsteps of the Swedish South Polar expedition, which had been there in 1901, 1904. And of course, for some of you, you know what happened to them. They had a really bad time, and a lot of them ended up on Paulet Island. But they made some amazing geological discoveries. Argentinians actually maintain a base on the top of this mesa on Seymour Island. This is it. It is a most unusual island, as I'll come to in the next slide. Right in front of the base is where a fossil whale was picked up. Now, oops, I'll go back one. Okay. Bill Zinsmeister, who is here to Ohio State, is in the later 70s, 80s, and a mollusk paleontologist. He went down, amongst others, and collected the shells, the invertebrate faunas that are present on Seymour Island. After the Nordenskjold expedition, there were 24 known invertebrate genera. When Bill finished his work and published it, there were 176 genera known. Seymour Island is probably one of the prime localities in the southern hemisphere for paleontologists. The rocks are about 40 to 50 million years in age, and we see here not only mollusk shells, snails, there are echinoids, starfish, crustaceans, corals, barnacles, you name it. And then a variety of vertebrates. Shark's teeth, you just pick up 2 or dozen. And other vertebrates have been recovered there. I point out as well here, it is insignificant and impossible to see, but you remember these stories about the demise of dinosaurs and bolide impact on the Yucatan Peninsula. Well, that time interval is represented in these rocks which are exposed on Seymour Island. And they are exposed behind Bill here. It is the only place I know of in the southern hemisphere where there is continuous deposition of sediment across that boundary, the time interval at that boundary when the meteorite struck the Yucatan Peninsula. And so this is in fact an extremely important locality for people who are interested in trying to understand the geological events around the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary at the time of that bolide impact. Well, at the same time, and thereafter I did some work in the northern peninsula off the Hero. This is a 120-foot vessel that was extremely good for getting close into shore. Larger vessels simply couldn't do it, but the Hero allowed you to get access to many places that were otherwise inaccessible. It was in the South Orkney Islands. This is the Newmire Channel along the peninsula, and it also got me back into Hope Bay. The British base is off to the left here, the Argentinians off to the right there. I was working on these rocks, but what I'm interested in now is the fact that the penguin rookery is right behind that lot. See, when you look at your TV and nature programs, you see these pictures of Adelie penguins, which are one of the true Antarctic penguins, and then these subantarctic species, gentoos and chinstraps. And they all look nice and tidy and clean and dressed for dinner in their dinner jackets. Life is different. Reality for a penguin in midsummer is like this. The 1.5 million, estimated 1.5 million Adelie penguins on Brash Island and the Danger Islands, and this is their living conditions. If you want to know what guano looks like, that's what it looks like. I landed on that island and I decided that I would rather fall in the icy water than fall over in a penguin rookery. The smell is impossible to get rid of. But back to Seymour Island, because it really is a fantastic place for a paleontologist. The Swedish expedition found bones of a giant penguin. See, this is emperor penguin bones, these, and this is the giant penguin, which is about 5.5 feet tall. Since that time, they found penguin remains on Seymour and also on the Chatham Islands, which lie east of New Zealand. And these new penguins, two different species, are probably as tall as the man, 6 foot tall. I mean, they would be formidable things to meet on the shore. These are billfish vertebrae, the first ones which were ever recorded in rocks of this age, 40 to 50 million years from the southern hemisphere. And I mentioned earlier that all sorts of other bones are found on Seymour Island, including what might be called a precursor of the wandering albatross. It certainly filled the same ecological niche, but it was a little bit bigger, 15-foot wingspan it is thought to have had. And well, I don't have time really to talk about Coburn Island, where there's a marvelous comment about penguin effluvium, which I could tell you about. So I'll skip on to the next one, which relates back to Bill Zinsmeister. And when he was collecting his fossils, he took a mammal paleontologist with him. And they were on the island for 5 weeks. On the last day, this poor despondent Mike Woodburn from Riverside, having found nothing, he sat down for his last granola bar, ate it, scooped up the sand, shook it, looked at his hand, And what did he see? What he saw was this. See the size, 5 millimeter? This is part of a jawbone with teeth of a marsupial, an arboreal marsupial belonging to the genus Polydolops, which is a marvelous name for anything. Yeah. But this island it's out of this world for paleontology. And in fact, the Argentinians have maintained a program on Seymour Island for many years now, since that discovery. And they have found an amazing collection of primitive mammals and early marsupials. And of course, this connects Australia with its marsupial populations, and South America, which also has marsupials. I have to get back to the Transantarctic Mountains and the lavas, but I will skip over any details of those and just mention that the magmas, the molten rock which produced the lavas at the surface, were also intruded into the sedimentary sequence underlying. These rock bodies are 300 to 600 feet thick on average, and in the Dufek Massif, this is a related sequence of those molten rocks. This is a rock body that is about 50,000 square kilometers, maybe as much as 9 kilometers thick. It's a huge body. In other parts of the world where these are found, they contain platinum. And the biggest one is in South Africa, the Bushveld. In the 1950s and 60s, of course, we were in the height of the Cold War, went on longer than that. At that time, sources of platinum were in South Africa, what is now Zimbabwe, and Soviet Union. So strategically, the Dufek was potentially an extremely important place to go and look for platinum. If it occurs, it actually occurs below anything that is exposed at the surface. But nobody has drilled to find out, which is a very good thing. Now, I mentioned that as a strategic issue that people are much concerned about at the time. And down below, I have a picture of an oil rig off Patagonia, but this is to remind me that the Japanese at that time were running seismic surveys around Antarctica, clearly looking for oil. And this got the treaty nations somewhat concerned, and so they got together to try to develop some protocol to control the mineral exploration and exploitation. What they came up with was this CRAMRA, the Convention on the Regulation of Resource Activities. It raised its head, completed after 7 years, put forward to the treaty nations in 1988, but died very quickly because both Australia and France objected, and of course supported by Greenpeace and all the environmentalists, in fact, since it was a convention about resource activities. Now, in fact, the environmental regulations under CRAMRA were so stringent that the CEO of a big mining company said they wouldn't even think about going there, let alone the extra cost of operating in Antarctica, such a remote place, such a harsh climate. So it died, but it was resurrected, or the environmental restrictions were resurrected as the Protocol on Environmental Protection, which in fact governs, or ought to govern, all the activities in Antarctica today. What you can do and not allowed to do, how much you've got to clean up, getting rid of all the waste materials and so on. But back to some geology. Remember the small camp in 1969? This is a camp in 2010, 2011. Much, much bigger program dreadfully bureaucratic, I'm afraid to say. Really awful. It was located just to the left of the picture. This is Coalsack Bluff. This is where Lystrosaurus was found. Lots of other bones are found here in the Gordon Valley, but this is the place I'm interested in at the moment, on Mount Kirkpatrick. And in December 1990, I was there with Richard Hansen, who was then at Ohio State, and we were following up on what Peter Barrett and I had done in January 1967. Nobody had been back there since. And so we were walking the section, which simply means we were climbing up through the rocks, looking at them, trying to figure out how we would collect, how we would divide the rocks up, what we'd record, and so on. And so we had made our way up to that point by lunchtime, and then we sat down beneath this cliff. You can see some people for scale here. These are red jackets on people. And sat down behind this cliff to have our lunch, and we looked out on this marvelous scenery, beautiful clear day. You eat your granola bar, drink some water, and as any decent field scientist does, before you go back to work, you have to take care of nature. So I went round the corner to take care of nature, and to my amazement, there's something in the rock that certainly doesn't look as though it belongs there. It's not a little pebble, it's grey, it's big, it's spatula-shaped, and it took a little while for me to register that this actually had to be fossil bone. And it turned out to be a cervical rib. And this is a toe bone, a metatarsal. This is a humerus. This is the skull, still in the rock. And this is the paleontologist who actually recovered it, Bill Hammer, who has just recently retired from Augustana College. And he quarried the remains of, or quarried this locality, took it back to Augustana and prepared the bones, and then was able to reconstruct Cryolophosaurus, 24 foot long. You probably have seen it in the entrance to Orton Hall. The skull is there in the museum. It's a carnivore. This tooth belongs to another little carnivore found in the same bed. These are toe bones of a large herbivorous dinosaur. And what I think is really interesting is that this is the skull as it was prepared by Bill and cleaned up, got rid of all the matrix material. This is still rock matrix, the sand grains and so on that were embedded, that the skull was embedded in. It's not been completely cleaned, but you can see the crest, which gives the lopho part of the Cryolophosaurus, and a bunch of bones that I cannot make any sense of. However, this is the intriguing one, this one, because Bill says that it does not belong to the Cryolophosaurus. And so one can think of many other ways in which that bone might have got into that position, and because this is a reworked deposit, things have been moved around, sands, waters are moving, bones floating around. But the explanation I prefer is that we have evidence that this poor old dinosaur died choking on his last supper. Well, why a misspent career? Well, you see, when I received my bachelor's degree, I went to London University and I took a course in economic geology in order to go into mining industry, mineral exploration. This just happens to be the big hole at Kimberley, and these are 1 day's worth of diamonds. This is about a foot square. I am no nearer that responsible career as an economic geologist today than I was 60 years ago. Thank you.
questions, please. I'll pass the microphone to you.
Oh, I can talk louder. I just want to mention that the first baby was born in the Antarctic last year, 2018, for the Argentinas.
Oh, no, there was one born in 78, because I saw it myself. I mean, we landed at Hope Bay in 78, and we just paid a courtesy call to the Argentine base, and of course we were instructed to come and see the latest edition. I mean, it was there.
They told us it was last year.
Oh no, they're wrong, I'm afraid. This is one point where I know with absolute authority.
But he was in no other way responsible.
So you described the countries that were signing the treaty. Is there any problem with countries that haven't signed the treaty coming in?
Oh yeah, no. Under the treaty, there are 12 original signatories. There are 17 who have signed on and are termed consultative parties. The requirement is that they maintain a scientific program. And they are voting members, like the original 12. Another 24 are non-consultative members. They've signed on, but they don't have voting rights, but they can attend the treaty meetings, and I believe they can make suggestions, but they cannot vote. So, I mean, it's been a very effective treaty, and it will remain effective until somebody decides that they have to make some political statement. And then, of course, all hell will probably break loose.
Yes, are there lakes under the snow and ice over there?
Sorry, are there lakes? Yeah, there are lakes under the ice. There are many, many lakes. The biggest one, known as Lake Vostok, is the size of Lake Erie, and it sits under the East Antarctic ice sheet. I don't know that I can get back. Okay, there we go. There we go. Has it gone? Oh, no, I know. Probably I've got to get out of this into the... normal, it should work. Sorry? Oh, yeah, of course. I was trying to do it the smart way. Okay. The Lake Vostok is out here. And in fact, it was known from the early Russian expeditions that there was a place out there near Vostok Station that was absolutely flat. And this is indicative of the surface at the base of the ice sheet. It's a lake. And since that time, they have detected, or must be 20 or 30 lakes under the ice. And for physicists and chemists and other people, they understand that what it is the pressure melting point has been reached, and so it is wet at the base of the ice sheet due to geothermal heat from below. And so the East Antarctic ice sheet it has a large number of places where there is water at the base, but it's still largely close to sea level. West Antarctica is quite different. I mean, that would be an archipelago if the ice disappeared. No, but did I finish the question? Answering the question? Yes. Yes.
When you were on Seymour Island, you spotted a band that you said had continuous deposits over several geological ages. Did I hear you right?
Not quite. No. that horizon, which is the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary, which is marked by the bolide impact and the so-called demise of dinosaurs, it is marked by, well, for the geologists, it's an iridium anomaly. But be that as it may, it is a highly distinctive marker. And in very many places around the world where the boundary is exposed, it is not a place where there's continuous deposition of sediment, but it's where there is a break in sedimentation so that it looks as though it is continuous, but you can demonstrate that it is not. No. So for those who are interested in trying to understand the geology and the events surrounding that, you have to have places where, as far as you can determine, there has been continuous deposition across this boundary. And so the actual time interval is tiny. And the rocks on Seymour Island go from about 70 million years to 35 million years, but there is this horizon at the southern end of the island which you can walk out. It's amazing. It's exposed for 12 kilometers. And this is truly amazing for the paleontologist, because you're not dealing with a little outcrop and you're poking around trying to find fossils there. You've got 12 kilometers of outcrop to examine and find the fossils and relate things to this boundary. Yes?
David, when I visited Ushuaia, I've been to the Antarctic, but I visited the Argentinian Antarctic Research Center, and there they had significant number of fossil remains. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Antarctic was like at that time?
My guess is that the remains almost all come from Seymour Island. So because the places where the Argentinians have other bases, you're not going to find any fossils or nothing worthwhile compared with Seymour. So they would have been the sorts of things that I was talking about. But also the ammonites and belemnites, which come from the Cretaceous. I mean, these fossils are beautifully preserved. I mean, on the ammonites and belemnites that are 70 or 80 million years or even older than that, you can still find the nacreous shell of the animal. It's amazing.
But they had dinosaur remains.
Yes, they do. But they come not from Seymour Island, but from James Ross Island, an adjacent island. And it's all part of the same sedimentary basin. There are a large number of, I have to think what they are. There are many plesiosaurs, which are large marine reptiles.
They had land fossil remains of dinosaurs also, I think.
Well, if they're land, they are the remains which have been swept out into the ocean, because all the rocks on that region are marine. And so the land animal remains have been swept out by rivers flowing out into this sedimentary basin. I do not know offhand what they have collected, other than that I do know that they and other groups actually have collected dinosaur remains. I can't help beyond that, I'm sorry. Yes?
Dave, when you were on Deception Island, it's the caldera, what was the temperature of the water when you were there? The reason I was asking, in the 80s when I was there, we could go swimming.
Oh yeah, no, you can still go swimming. No, being a volcano, an active volcano, there are hot springs around there, and around Whalers Bay, actually if you can see it, it's right there. Okay, there we go. Okay, it's round here. There are hot springs, the ground is warm, and people sort of scoop out a big hollow and they lie in the hot waters. And then they cool off by going into the bay itself.
We were actually going out into the bay.
Oh, yes.
But it was steamy because of
Yeah,
the
okay. It does change in the course of time, actually. The actual sites where the steam is coming out, it moves around. And different places become more active, and so you land there and you just choose the place where the water's hottest. You know?
I think we have time for one more question. One volunteer.
Does treaty prevent nuclear power from being used on Antarctica? It would be a good analog for Mars.
Yeah. The Navy ran a nuclear power station for many years. And of course, a power station is not the same as disposing of nuclear waste or having explosions. A lot of people, the keener environmentalists, objected highly to the fact of that being a nuclear power station at McMurdo. It was eventually removed, mainly because they were having continuous problems with it. And it's not because it was leaking radioactive material or anything, but it was more basic engineering troubles that they were having. And they decided to disband it. In any case, because of the treaty, they might just as well.
Well, Dave, this is amazing. I wish we could listen to more and more and more, but we do have to depart this place. It is time, and we always have a short business meeting. I think they average approximately 2 minutes in geological time.